I need to designate someone to always remind me to hit the record button because I am really bad about forgetting to do that.
I can remind you.
Thank
I
you, Kara.
Yeah, I never remember to do it when I'm teaching, but whenever I'm a student, I always remember.
It's such a simple thing, and I always forget to do it. All right, next up. Already the host, cool. All right, guys. I am skipping through a whole bunch of the PowerPoint. So heads up, when you get the PowerPoint, there's going to be whole sections that are review, things we've already covered. It goes into muscle contractions again. It goes into joint types again. By this point in our journey through school, all of us should already know the major joint types, right? Um, your diarthrotic, synovial, or sorry, diarthrotic, amphiarthrotic, and synarthrotic joints. Is this new information to anybody? No, cool. It shouldn't be. So next up, we talk about different kinds of synovial joints. So things like ball and socket, pivot, hinge, gliding, ellipsoid, saddle joints. Also old news to us. We know about starting off with knee joint. So the knee joint is the largest joint in the body. It is technically named the tibiofemoral joint between the tibia and the femur. Couple points to notice. First of all, notice that the patella isn't really mentioned because the patella is an extra part of the knee. It's not really an integral part. Third thing is notice the fibula is also not mentioned. The fibula is not weight bearing. Therefore, it does not have a significant role to play in the knee. Its role is more about structural support. So we've got the distal femur, we have the proximal tibia, the proximal fibula, and the patella. So the knee, the patella itself is a sesamoid bone. That's one of the classifications of bone shapes. It lives inside of a tendon. That's its identifying feature. So the front side of the bone, its anterior side, is just pretty much solid bone. The posterior side is articular cartilage. The entire side is encased with articular cartilage. The broad superior end is called the base. So I'm just going to flip over here so we can take a look at it real quick. So the superior end is called the base. The pointed inferior end is called the apex. And you'll notice it lives its life kind of embedded within the quadriceps tendon. And it serves as an interface. The purpose of this is to be able to adjust the angle of leverage for the tendon as it plugs onto the tibia. By changing the angle of leverage, we can increase the strength of the muscle. It also, since you have a bony shield right in front of the largest joint in the body, it provides an extra degree of protection. So that's all about the patella. The next major structure of the knee to talk about is the meniscus or the menisci. When we talk about the meniscus of the knee, there are two. There's a medial and a lateral. Generally, they're just referred to as one structure, the meniscus, but to refer to both of them, plural, menisci. These help with the fit of the bones. So they just kind of sit on top of the tibia. The femur rests inside of these little cartilage cups, and it just makes sure that these two bones are kind of fitted nicely together. It is cartilage. So another major principle is shock absorption. As you walk, it absorbs a lot of the shock between these two bones. And as the bones slide across each other, it reduces friction. Remember, when bones move, we can have zero friction happening at all. No friction. Any friction is going to be a bad deal. Just running down the street would produce enough friction to start cooking your muscle tissue in your knees. So you really cannot afford any friction going on. Now, something to note, the meniscus plays no role in preventing the knee from being displaced. Its role is not to hold these bones together. Its job is to make sure that they fit nicely together. Other structures are going to hold the bones together. Guys, what structure holds bones together? I'm thinking
Ligaments.
of a tissue. Ligaments connect bone to bone. The ligaments of the knee hold the bones together. The meniscus just makes sure that they sit nicely and fit and kind of lock together. So, common conditions of the knee, number 1, torn cartilage. That's pretty common. Number 2, it's called water on the knee. You guys ever played that old game, Operation? You had to pull the bucket out of the guy's knee. You guys know what I'm talking about, Operation. Anyway, water on the knee is excessive synovial fluid. So the fluid builds up and you end up with swelling, and the way that they usually treat that is through aspiration, which is a really fancy way of saying they stick in a needle and they drain the fluid out of it. Third is a lateral blow. So standing upright, a blow comes in from the lateral side, causing the knee to bend medially, which it is not supposed to do. It is only supposed to bend forward, backward. Now, what would happen with a lateral blow, I'm going to pull up this guy again. So we're going to look at the knee. I'm going to take away the muscle. This time we're focused on ligament. Look at all those ligaments wrapped all the way around that joint, making sure those suckers do not move at all. Let's thin the playing field just a little bit. All right, so here we have, nope, I thinned it too much. There we go. We have the tibial collateral ligament. The collateral ligaments are holding two specific things together. Here we have tibia and femur. On the opposite side, we have the anterolateral ligament, the lateral patellar retinaculum. My point is, lots of ligaments. We've got lots and lots of ligaments. So what will happen is a force will impact the knee from the lateral side. So as the knee starts to bend inward, all of the ligaments on the anterior side get overstretched. So anterior ligaments tear when we receive a lateral blow. I'm seeing lots of nods. Good, good, good. So if we understand this concept, then we would also understand why for certain medial blows. So now the blow, come on, pen, comes from the medial side. Now the lateral ligaments would be overstretched or torn. Good stuff. Good stuff. So torn cartilage, water on the knee, lateral blows, very common knee injuries. So of those ligaments, all the ligaments around the knee, and remember guys, there's like a good dozen to a half dozen. There's quite a few. The major ones that we really want to make sure that we are aware of. We have the cruciate ligaments and the collateral ligaments. Cruciate comes from the Latin word crus, which means cross. So crus literally means cross, just like the cross, that's what it means. So the cruciate ligaments are the crossed ligaments. When we look into the knee, we will see a set of ligaments. There we go. A set of ligaments that crisscross each other. One of them sits in the front, one of them sits in the back. So we have our anterior cruciate ligament and the posterior cruciate ligament. Football fans, you've heard of these before, those career-ending injuries to the ACL or the PCL. That's these guys, the anterior cruciate and the posterior cruciate ligaments. Either one of those could be career-ending injuries if you are a pro football player. Luckily, my pro football career ended long ago. All right. So anterior and cruciate or posterior cruciate ligaments. What these guys are meant to prevent is anterior posterior displacement of the knee. What we mean is if the femur and the tibia are supposed to be sitting on top of each other, we do not want the femur to start slipping forward or slipping backward. So the cruciate ligaments, which sit on the tibial plateau, hold the two together and lock them in place. This is very important for stabilizing the knee, especially when the knee is in a fixed position, meaning the knee is staying put, the rest of the body may be moving. That knee has to be locked in place. Now, the collateral ligaments. What I want you to think with the word collateral. Co meaning like two or more, lateral because it's on the sides. These are ligaments that connect two bones on the sides. There are the medial collateral ligament, the MCL, and the lateral collateral ligament. Yes, that is its real name. No, I did not make that up. Lateral collateral ligament, the LCL. These are ligaments that will run from the tibia below to the femur on top, respectively, on the lateral or medial aspect of the knee joint itself. The medial ligament connects to the medial condyle of the tibia and the medial epicondyle of the femur. The lateral collateral ligament will connect the lateral condyle of the tibia to the lateral epicondyle of the femur. That was a bunch of words. Ignore the lines. I don't know how to make the lines go away. I've tried. I don't know how. So we're just going to ignore my little drawings on there for the moment. There is our tibial collateral ligament. This is welcome to anatomy. Everything has 5 different names. We just all have to die mad about it. The tibial collateral ligament, AKA the medial collateral ligament. We'll rotate this around. There is your fibular collateral. Nope. We're going to go with this one. Anterolateral ligament of the knee. Connects the lateral condyle of the tibia to the lateral epicondyle of the femur. All right, good stuff, fun stuff. Okay, last detail. The collateral ligaments prevent displacement of the knee, especially when the knee is extended, because when the knee is extended, that is when they are the most taut. That's when they're pulled the tightest. So they prevent lateral displacement of the knee. The cruciate ligaments prevent anterior posterior displacement of the knee. And I will show you, since I have the fancy anatomy app, let me pull up a new model. And it did not clear my tools. Okay. There we go. Nope. How do I erase my freaking thing?
Try power cycling the app.
Ugh, that takes so long. There we go. Clear 2D pen. I got to remember that trick. All right, so give me a moment. I'm just going to like dissect away the knee. You can see in there there's the ACL and the PCL. I'm gonna dig a little bit more and see if I can't. There we go. So do you notice how these two ligaments just sit in situ, crossed, one relative to another? That's it. And if you're looking at that thing and you're saying, wow, that's a really tiny ligament, like the whole thing, that ACL, the whole thing has got to be what, that long, which is not that big, but that tiny ligament will end your career, end your football career. Next, I'm going to take a top-down view of the tibia, and now we see a really good shot of the menisci. Here is the medial and the lateral. Notice, those are just pillows of cartilage. Those are not doing anything to add stability to the knee. They're not holding bones together. These guys are not going to do anything to keep the femur from sliding off. All they're doing is giving nice little ridges for the femur to kind of slide into, to kind of get a good fit. But that meniscus is just a little bit of cartilage. It ain't doing nothing for stability or support.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, hold on. So, like, the menisci would be and with not with muscles, but with tendons, would it be a synergist then? I mean, metaphorically, like I'm trying to get a better sense of
metaphorically, yeah, we could say they're there to metaphorically, we would say the menisci are there to cushion the two bones, because remember, the knee is one of the most weight-bearing joints, meaning the amount of weight that's put onto that joint is greater than the amount of weight that's put on almost every other joint, save for like the ankle, right? So the knees are under constant pressure. So you want a thick, cushy layer of cartilage to provide a lot of cushion and support, but the shape of it allows both of these two bones, which, if we're being honest, guys, those two bones don't really look like they fit together very well, do they? I mean, if you've ever taken the chance to look, you've got two very round condyles on the femur. Like, they're prominently rounded. But distinctively on the tibia, right, like the tibial plateau, the top of the tibia is extremely flat. It's extremely flat. So how are you going to keep basically, how do you keep a ball on a tabletop? Well, you put little bumpers on the sides, of course, to keep the ball from bouncing off the table. So that's where the menisci come in, is that they just keep the two stacked. But again, you start running really quickly and your foot gets stuck in a hole, or a football player throws a football and suddenly you're running and then you got to change direction really quickly. That twisting action on the knee with just the meniscus, forget it, dude. Your knee is falling off. Like, the knee is just not structured that way until we start adding in all of these ligaments, which are super strong and very dense and really lock the bones together. So what I would say is, if you think about a shoe, the meniscus is more like the insole. It makes sure the shoe fits you properly, but it ain't keeping the shoe on your foot. You need shoestrings for that, like ligaments.
I like the ball and the bumper.
Then you use that one, my friend.
Okay.
Yeah, like a pool table is going to have a little rim around the table. Doesn't stop anyone from shaking the table, though. All right, folks. All right, patellar ligament and the quadriceps tendon. Now, this one gets a lot of people really scratching their heads. I'm just going to say, remember a couple of things. First of all, Everything in anatomy is named by human beings. And as you've picked up probably so far, everything in anatomy has like 5 different names, and they are all valid, and we all just have to die mad about it because no one is going around picking the right name for stuff, right? Words are tools. They are not our masters. We came up with the names, so we can name them whatever we want, right? You find a new bump on a bone, you can call it the fart bump, and no one can stop you. Names are just that. They are conventions that we use. However, when we start getting into medicine, we remember that names have specific meanings, right? We use a technical language. So when we talk about a tendon or a ligament, what we are using is a technical term. All 4 of your quadricep muscles become a single tendon, one tendon. In that tendon is embedded the patella. So why did we call it the quadriceps tendon? Because it's connecting a muscle, the quadriceps, to a bone, the patella. By definition, that is a tendon. But the patella is just embedded within a tendon. The full tendon will continue on past the patella and ultimately insert onto the tibia at the tibial tuberosity. So while effectively it's still a tendon connecting the muscle to a bone, more strictly speaking, technically speaking, it's a ligament connecting the bone of the patella to the bone of the tibia. So since the function has changed, since its role has changed, we are going to change its name. We're doing this. It starts out its life as the quadriceps tendon, the tendon for the quadriceps. After the patella, we change its name to the patellar ligament, the ligament of the patella that connects it to the tibia. I want to be very clear, guys. That is a dotted line that we are drawing on a piece of tissue, right? We are taking our magic marker and we draw a line and we say, up here, there be tendon. Down there be ligament. It is completely a convention that we do so that we can be strict with our terminology. Let's be clear. If you were to take a knife and you cut this muscle right here, right off of someone's thigh, and you peel it back, you will peel that muscle and the tendon and the patella all the way to the ligament. You will peel this muscle off, and the only thing hanging on is that one attachment at the tibial tuberosity. I just want to be clear, guys. It's the same structure. We are the ones changing its name. We, meaning the medical community, right? Humans in the profession. So when we talk about the patellar ligament, we're just talking about the distal aspect of the quadriceps tendon. It's the same structure, right? You know, they pull that stunt a lot of times with roads where you're on one road and you get to an intersection, and when you go through the red light, the name of the road changes, but it's the same strip of pavement, right? The road itself has not changed. We changed its name. That is what is going on here. So there's just a somewhat decent illustration of the knee. We've got our collateral ligaments on the sides. We have our cruciate ligaments in the middle. We can also see the menisci, mediolateral menisci. And yet another illustration of what is going on in the knee. If what I have said so far makes sense to you, these are good illustrations, a little bit of extra info and blurbs. But if I'm making sense to you guys, then we can move right along. Good stuff? Awesome, 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 awesome. All right. Meniscus tears generally happen when the foot is planted and the knee twists. So how does this happen? People are running in a field and their foot gets stuck in a hole. And so as they're running, the body keeps moving, but the foot does not. And so they just spin around with their foot planted. The knee twists, the meniscus tears. Pretty common injury. All right. Pelvic tilt. just a couple of slides on this. The tip with identifying pelvic tilt is to follow the water. If the hips are a bowl of water, which way is the water pouring out? Is it an anterior pelvic tilt pouring water out of the front? Or is it a posterior pelvic tilt? If you look at this guy, he would be pouring water out of the back side of his hips. I feel like this really was just kind of like sandwiched in here. I feel like there needs to be a little more explanation, but we talk way more about this in postural assessment in a few other classes rather than kinesiology. So I'm just going to keep moving right along to the main topic for today. So the major muscles that we are going to talk about today are the quadriceps and sartorius. These guys tend to go buddy-buddy together. Now we're talking about quadriceps today because last week we talked about hamstrings, and hamstrings and quadriceps are antagonistic muscle pairs. So what does that mean? That means where the hamstrings will extend the hip, the quadriceps are going to flex the hip. Where the hamstrings flex the knee, the quadriceps are going to extend the knee. All of the quadricep muscles sit on the front of your thigh, so they are relatively easy for you to palpate on yourself. As the name would imply, the quadriceps, 4 muscles in this group. Now, I am going to pause on the slides. I'm going to do my own thing, and then I'm going to come back, and we're going to tie up the loose ends of what I've done. So the topic is quadriceps. The name quad means 4. The ending sep or ceph refers to a head. So we are looking at a 4-headed muscle. What is a 4-headed muscle? This is a muscle that has 4 distinct origins. So 4 set places where these muscles will begin, but 1 insertion. All of these muscles insert at the same spot. That is what a 4-headed muscle means. 4 origins, 1 insertion. By the way, when we get to biceps, 2 origins, 1 insertion. When we do the arm and you learn about the tricep, 3 origins, 1 insertion. Same pattern, guys. So each of the origins gives you a different muscle. The major muscles of the quadriceps group. Number 1, rectus femoris. Rectus tells you this is going to be a vertical muscle. This is a muscle that will run up and down. Femoris tells you the neighborhood it lives in. It lives in the neighborhood of the femur. This muscle will be found on the thigh. So we are looking for a vertical muscle on the thigh. The next 3 muscles, just like the gluteals, they're a family. They're the vastus family. So we have vastus, daddy, mama, and baby. We have vastus lateralis, the vastus muscle on the lateral side. Vastus intermedius, the one in the middle. And vastus medialis, the one on the medial side. This one is probably the easiest to identify. It has a very distinct teardrop shape to it. Very distinctive. Once you've seen it, you'll never miss it. It is, you can spot it a mile away. Very distinctive muscle. So there you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the 4 quadricep muscles. Vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, or sometimes named intermedialis, same thing. Vastus medialis, and rectus femoris, which I will often abbreviate to rec-fem. Rec-fem. Now today we're going to talk about one more muscle. This muscle does not belong to the quadriceps group, but he's like, you know, everybody's got that uncle who you call uncle, but he's not really your uncle, but like we call him uncle. That guy. His name is sartorius. He's the uncle of the quadriceps, an honorary quadricep, if you will. So, rectus femoris will start at the AIIS. On the AIIS, which tells me something important. What bone is the AIIS on? Don't overthink it. What bone's it on?
The ilium.
On the ilium. So a hip bone, which means if it starts on a hip bone, that means this muscle crosses the hip. So guess what this muscle has to move? The hip, right? It crossed the hip. It's got to move the hip. Rectus femoris is the only quadricep that moves the hip, the only one that crosses. Since it starts at the AIIS on the anterior side, something that crosses the anterior side of a joint is going to flex that joint. So it's a hip flexor. All of your other vastus muscles will all originate on the femur, which means they do not cross the hip. They only cross the knee. So rectus femoris is the only quadricep muscle that will flex the hip. All of the others do the only action that the quadriceps as a group will share. Their common insertion will be at the tibial tuberosity. Now we are crossing the knee on the anterior side. And once we cross the hip, everything's backwards. Muscles that cross the front of the knee will now extend the knee. So they straighten the knee. All three of these muscles share that same common action, as does rectus femoris. Rectus femoris just gets the extra action of also flexing the hip. So, looking at the front of the hip, here is vastus lateralis. Take a note, we're going to turn this muscle to the side. It's a broad muscle. That's why their name is vastus. They are very broad. If you take away the IT band, I'm just going to take that off. That muscle is flippin' huge. It's huge. It's almost the entire width of your thigh. It's huge. Right here in the middle is a vertical muscle directly on the midline of the thigh. That is rec fem, rectus femoris. Right there in front. I'm going to take this muscle and I'm going to hide it. We're going to cut it away to see what's underneath it. And there, that little strap of a muscle is vastus intermedius. So rec fem is right on top, right in front row center, you can't miss it. But when we take rectus femoris away, now we have vastus lateralis, intermedius, and finally medialis. If we stick all the muscles back, note that distinctive teardrop shape. That's that's vastus medialis. So there are the four quadriceps, the three vastus muscles in the vastus family, plus rectus femoris. Next, we're going to take a look at the uncle, sartorius. Sartorius begins on the ASIS, so it starts on the hip. It will cross the thigh diagonally, headed towards the knee. But as it approaches the knee, it starts to curve. It wraps around the medial aspect of the knee and finally inserts on the medial aspect at the pes anserinus attachment site. So sartorius runs from the ASIS to pes anserinus. Now, pes anserinus is a Latin name for this spot on the tibia. Pes means foot, anserine means goose. So the pes anserinus literally translates to goose foot. I did not make these names up, guys. Remember, they smoked a lot of opium back in the day. So basically what we're looking at on the tibia is you have 3 separate muscles that all insert at the same spot. And remember, they smoked a lot of opium back in the day and saw shapes in the clouds and then named things based on what they thought they looked like. So when you've got the 3 muscles here and then you kind of connect them, it looks like a little goose foot. All right. So let's look at quadriceps. We said rectus femoris is the only quadricep that crosses the hip. Let's take a close look at this one. There it is, starting at the AIIS. So it does, in fact, cross that hip joint. And then the muscle stops there, but we also understand next comes the patella, then the patellar ligament, and then it inserts on the tibia. So this muscle goes from AIIS to tibial tuberosity. That will make it a hip flexor and a knee extensor. Those are its 2 actions. That's it. That's all. Nothing else. That's what it does. Next, we'll take a look at vastus lateralis. Notice this one starts on the anterior aspect of the greater trochanter. So this one starts on the femur, and it does not cross the hip. It will also join with all the rest of the quadriceps at the tibial tuberosity. So this muscle's only action is going to be knee extension. It straightens the knee. We're going to start seeing a similar story here, guys. The vastus intermedius starts on the intertrochanteric line on the anterior side. So again, starts on the femur, ends on the tibia. The only thing this muscle is going to be able to do is straighten the knee, knee extension. We'll show our final quadricep muscle, vastus medialis. It also starts at that intertrochanteric line. Since they all share the same insertion, guys, tibial tuberosity, they're all going to perform the same action. Lastly, we have sartorius.
Oh, I got a quick question.
Yeah, let it rip.
Okay. So trying to get a visual on this. So if the rectus femoris is the only muscle that flexes the hip of the quads, does that mean that it is what gets activated when you do box jumps?
Please clarify, what is a box jump?
Really?
Do you think I play sports?
Yes.
No. What is a box jump? Is that when you jump onto the stack of boxes?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like plyometrics, basically.
Yes. So yes, especially in the down swing. So like when you're squatting down, building up your power, and then you jump. So the quads bring you down, hamstrings will launch you as they straighten the legs and extend the hips.
Okay. So those people like probably have really strong, what was that acronym you said? Femur?
Rectus femoris, rec fem.
Mm-hmm. Rec fem. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, they would have really strong quadriceps. They would also have really powerful hamstrings and glutes, because remember the flexors are bringing you down towards the ground. It's the extensors and the flexors of the knee that are launching you forward. And that's where the power is really coming from.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, if box jumpers would have really good butts. They'd have really well-developed glutes.
Cool. Thanks.
Anytime, anytime. Always down to talk about well-developed glutes. All right, so rectus femoris is the only one that crosses the hip. We are going to look at sartorius. I'm going to isolate this muscle. ASIS to the pes anserinus. Now this muscle is doing a lot. Notice all the different directions this thing goes. So let's start breaking this down. First things first, guys. Rule number one, it crosses the hip. It's got to move the hip. Looking at where it crosses the hip, it crosses on the front. That will make it a hip flexor. So write that down. Action number one, flexion of the hip. Second thing we're going to look at. Notice the muscle starts on the lateral side, but it ends on the medial side. Yeah? If I were to draw, how do I do this? When I draw my line, we'll notice origin is lateral, insertion is medial. So when this muscle contracts and pulls its insertion towards its origin, it's going to cause the leg to swing outward, which is abduction. Yeah? Abduction of the hip. Good. Now, the other thing I want us to look at, notice the muscle runs at an angle. And we said muscles that go at an angle are going to rotate something. Well, it crosses two joints, so it can rotate both joints. But interestingly, it's going to rotate them both differently. We'll start with the hip. If we look at the hip, imagine if this muscle is shortening. And again, this is, we might have to wrap our heads around this a little bit. But we're going to look straight down and think about the hands of a clock. Ooh, come on, app. Don't do this to me. Oh, it's not letting me turn it the way I want to turn it. All right, so if you are looking down your own thigh, looking down through your right thigh, the origin of the sartorius would sit at 12 o'clock. The insertion would sit at 10 o'clock. Now, when the muscle shortens and pulls its insertion towards its origin, it is going to pull the 10 o'clock insertion towards the 12 o'clock insertion, which would look like that. Which is lateral rotation of the hip. Good stuff? Sometimes I feel like I have to over-explain that one, but this makes sense to you guys, yeah? It's going to laterally rotate the hip. Awesome. Now, when we look at the knee, it will medially rotate the knee once the knee is flexed. So we have to bend the knee first, then the sartorius will medially rotate the knee, not the hip. Pay attention to the patella. Once that knee bends, sartorius contracts, tibia rolls in towards the midline. It is a very slight movement. I will grant you that. But it's doing it. Cool. So we also have hip abduction, swinging the leg out to the side. We also know that it does hip flexion because it crosses the hip on the front side. And we also know that it will do hip lateral rotation. So again, don't pay attention to the foot, pay attention to the hip joint. The hip joint is laterally rotating. The foot looks like it's swinging out, but that's 3 joints later. That's not the focus of what we're doing today. Cool, cool. So for the sartorius, we should have about 5 actions listed so far. We should have hip flexion, hip lateral rotation, hip abduction. We should have knee flexion, and we should have knee medial rotation once the knee is flexed. All right. Good stuff so far. Everybody feeling hunky-dory so far? Right on, right on. All right, so vastus intermedius, it's the deep one, starts on the anterior and lateral shaft of the femur. I'm going to say the trochanteric line. That's the landmark that it starts at. The trochanteric line is the raised bit of bone that runs. Let me see if I can highlight my lines and ridges here. There we go. So that line right there, there's your trochanteric line. On the back side, it's the trochanteric crest because it is far more prominent on the back side. Intermedius and medialis will both start, oops. Bink, nope, come on thing. Intermedius and medialis will both start right there on that landmark, on the intertrochanteric line. Insertion will be the same for all quadricep muscles, tibial tuberosity via the patellar and the patellar ligament. What we're saying is it inserts at the tibial tuberosity, but we know that it doesn't just plug straight in. It's going to join by way of the kneecap and that patellar ligament. We are just acknowledging there's more to the structure. Tibial tuberosity. Like all quadriceps, because of the same insertion, it performs the same action, extension of the knee. Vastus lateralis, we see the lateral lip of the linea aspera and the gluteal tuberosity. Insertion is the same, tibial tuberosity. Action is the same, extension of the knee. For vastus medialis, origin, medial lip of the linea aspera, tibial tuberosity via the patella and patellar ligaments. I'm going to take a look at this real quick. This muscle definitely starts right there. My app is not showing me the same, like exactly the same as what the trail guide says. Whenever there is an issue, guys, we always defer to the trail guide. That's where the test questions come from. And that's what the MBLEX uses. We will always yield to the trail guide. But if anything, that just made it easier. Lateral lip of the linea aspera, medial lip of the linea aspera. Rectus femoris, origin AIIS, insertion tibial tuberosity. Since it crosses the hip, we get one bonus action. We have extension of the knee, and we have flexion of the hip. The only quad that crosses 2 joints. Lastly, we have sartorius. Origin, ASIS, insertion, pes anserinus, action, flexion, abduction and lateral rotation of the hip. We also have flexion and medial rotation of the flexed knee. Oh, the Taylor's muscle. Yes. So first of all, sartorius's major claim to fame is it is the longest muscle of the body, the longest one you have. It's the longest. Now, several muscles have one of these claims to fame attached to them. For many of them, let's say We have the longest, shortest, widest. We have broadest. Nope, that's the same thing. Longest, shortest, widest. Massive. So the sartorius is the longest by length. If you cut all the muscles out and you lay them out on a table and measure them, sartorius is the longest one. The widest muscle, the broadest muscle, that is going to be latissimus dorsi. The most massive, meaning the muscle that has the most mass. So if you cut it out and put it on a scale, it's going to be heavy and way more than all of the other muscles, gluteus maximus. It's an extremely dense muscle. Anyone ever cooked a dense piece of meat, like a Boston butt or a London broil or something like that, and you pick up the piece of meat and you're like, dude, this is way heavier than I thought it would be? That's gluteus maximus. Lastly, we have the shortest muscle. 10 points to your Hogwarts house if anyone can tell me what the shortest muscle in the body is.
Is it the muscles that attach to each individual like hairs of the body?
Good guess, but
getting
no.
the name. Okay.
You're thinking about the erector pili muscles.
Yes.
Yes. Good guess. Not correct, though.
Dang it.
The shortest muscle in the body is one of the muscles that attaches to the little bones, the ossicles in your inner ear. The muscle's name is stapedius. It's about 2 millimeters long, and it attaches to the stapes, which is the smallest bone in your body. If you want a general idea of about how small your stapes is, I would say find a normal, standard, something, anything printed down. Find a lowercase o. It's about that big. It's tiny. It's teeny, teeny, tiny. I have pictures that I can show you guys, but all 3 of those inner ear bones will sit on the top of a dime. They are teensy, teensy little bones. They're little teeny tiny things. That's why they're called ossicles, because they're just little bones. So sartorius is definitely going to be one, guys, of the muscles. Sartorius is one of the ones, like piriformis. You just need to know that one. ASIS to the pes anserinus, you got to know what it does. It's just one of the ones you got to know off the top of your head. You should also definitely know off the top of your head, sartorius is the longest muscle in the body. Now, one more thing, you may not need to know this one off the top of your head, but it does help. The name sartorius comes from the Latin root sartor, which means tailor, because what this muscle does is flexes the hip and laterally rotates the thigh and medially rotates the knee. It brings you into this seated position, which is the tailor's position. This is where tailors sit and do all their stuff with fabric or whatever it is they're doing. So that's where the name comes from. It's the tailor's muscle. All right, those are the 5 muscles for the day. Good stuff. Questions, comments, concerns? All right. Homework due next week, not this week, right? This week is going to be your hamstring muscle cards. Next week, when we come in, is going to be your quads and sartorius cards. And that's what we're doing in lab this week. We're doing quads and sartorius. It's going to be fun.
And we also have a test due, right?
Yeah, now that we're in the swing of things, there will be a quiz just about every week. It will be on Moodle. You guys got to check it. One more side note, since we're talking about quizzes. When you submit your quiz, if it doesn't give you a grade immediately, do not panic. The nature of those quizzes, since there's all the answers that you guys have to type in, it does not just accept things you type in. And if you don't type in exactly what Moodle is looking for, it will mark it wrong. So I have to go through manually and grade each question for each of your quizzes. It takes me a long time to grade all those quizzes, just fair warning. I try to stay on top of it week by week, but I'm really busy and sometimes I fall behind. Just a heads up. So when you click submit and it doesn't immediately give you a grade, just understand I have to manually grade those. Just keep that in mind.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
About this last week's quiz.
Sure.
On the first question, I don't know if everyone's took it or not. I don't know if it's appropriate if I talk about it, or can I?
I believe everyone's taken it so far.
It's funny, like on question 1, I just kind of stumbled on the language a little bit. And I thought, let me see if I can recite it. It's like the primary muscle contracting moves what? And when I was talking, and the answer was antagonist. That question. Does that seem familiar?
I feel like we may be confusing some questions. Let me pull the quiz up real quick. It just helps to have the
Yeah.
actual question.
It had something about the primary mover or the primary.
Yeah.
And the answer to that was antagonist. Now, how I interpreted that was the primary muscle moving is the one that's doing the contracting, which means it's moving. So basically, like if you take the bicep and it's contracting, since the myosin actin movement that in itself is causing the movement, that's the primary mover and not an antagonist. And I got that kind of stuff. So
okay,
I just
so let's not over. Yeah, so let's not overthink things.
The antagonist is the one that's being stretched. So technically, it's not, even though it is moving, it's not doing any kind of constriction or movement. It's how I kind of looked at it. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're overthinking it. Let's not overthink this stuff. When we were talking about actin and myosin, that's like chemically how the muscle contracts. What we're talking about in this class is now we know how the muscles contract. What we're talking about now is that muscles contract in groups. They work in groups. So when one muscle contracts, its antagonist pair has to relax for the movement to happen. So the first question muscles that release or yield as the prime mover contracts. Yeah?
Was that? I don't think that's how it was worded, though.
Muscles that release or yield as the prime mover contracts.
I guess
prime mover contracts and the other muscle relaxes. That muscle is an antagonist. By definition, that's what they do. So let's look at a blank is a primary muscle whose contraction directly moves a body part. If its contraction directly moves a body part, that's a prime mover or an agonist.
Okay. Yeah.
Let me try. Hold on, let me try doing.
So it's like for example, you take the bicep, it constricts. I see that as the movement, but it's actually what you're talking about is the tricep is the antagonist, and that's stretching, and that stretching is the movement. Is what you're referring to then.
No, not the stretching. The contraction is the movement.
And how's that not the primary? The primary.
So if we have bicep and we have tricep.
Okay.
When bicep contracts, tricep relaxes and lets go. The contraction pulls the elbow closed.
Right.
That's the movement. Bicep did that. Tricep relaxed to allow that movement to happen.
So the biceps the agonist.
Correct.
I got my language mixed up. I'm thinking antagonist.
Okay, so let's look at now
the
tricep.
Joker. You know, it's like the Joker with your analogy.
Yeah, yeah. So now let's look at tricep.
Joker.
Now when tricep contracts, bicep must relax now. So this guy contracts, pulls the elbow into extension. Bicep is relaxing and stretching as that happens. It's lengthening. So once we are extended, now that bicep is fully lengthened, now it contracts and pulls the arm back into flexion. And so when one turns on, the other has to relax, back and forth.
Okay, so what,
All joints all the way around.
Batman, in your analogy, to refresh my memory, what's Batman? He's the agonist then?
Yes, but bicep is Batman for elbow flexion.
Yeah, that's what
This
we're.
movement. Once we change the movement, and now we're talking about elbow extension, there's a new Batman in town. It's tricep. Tricep is Batman for this movement.
Right.
And now bicep is the Joker for extension. So,
Okay.
good stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I just stumbling on the language a bit. You know,
It takes a while to get it all straight.
and
absolutely-
you know the kind of like and I have an inherent understanding for the physiology for the many years of being active, you know, and stuff, but it's a sign in the language that I stumbled
Yeah.
on. Okay.
and that, yep.
Well, thank you, David.
Of course. Yeah, I pulled up the quiz specifically. The first question, a primary muscle whose contraction directly moves a body part, that's the prime mover or agonist.
Now I
And
put
this is the other thing is you typed in primary mover, but the
Yeah.
computer was looking for the word agonist. So you'll see it marked you wrong over here, but
Yeah.
I go through, that's what I mean. I have to manually go through. I gave you full points for that question
Oh,
because you got it
yeah.
right.
Oh, I thought when I read the test, you had me more wrong on that one.
The computer marked you wrong, but I
Okay.
gave you points for it.
It has been updated then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when
I'm-
I graded, I go through
Okay.
and it marked it correct.
okay.
So just, even if it tells you that you got a question wrong, don't always trust Moodle, because if I read what you gave me and I see you're on the right track, I'll still give you credit for it. Prime mover or primary mover, agonist, these mean the same thing.
Okay, that's
Just that
what I
when you
put.
type in, Moodle is looking for the word agonist. And if you didn't type in the word agonist, it's going to mark you wrong. I will go back and mark you right.
Okay. I just got ahead of myself on that one. Okay.
That's okay. And then another general note for everybody. Guys, read the questions carefully. If the question is asking you for origin and insertion, if you do not give me origin and insertion, it's not correct. So I have to take credit off. I had several questions where they just sent an origin and they forgot to include the insertion. You got to pay attention to those things, guys. I can only grade you based on what you give me. So if you don't give me half of an answer, I can't give you half credit. Good stuff. Good stuff. I think everybody did really well on their quiz. So
I had a question about the postural evaluation that's due. It's due Thursday before class, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Would you prefer us to just like write it out and submit it through Moodle, or did you want us to like cut and copy out of the PDF?
oh, either one. I
Okay.
don't care.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and don't stress too much about it. When you read that postural assessment, it's fairly basic questions. So don't.
You know, I thought we were gonna have to like take a picture and then do a postural assessment of someone, and I was just like,
Oh my
oh,
God,
okay,
no,
cool. We're just
it's like-
listing muscles. Awesome.
Oh my God, no, it's like 3 blanks you have to fill in. That's it. And if you've been paying attention to what we are talking about, you shouldn't have a problem answering like 3 questions. Yeah, no pictures, no soap notes, nothing like that. Awesome. Well, good stuff, guys. I've already kept you long enough after class. You guys enjoy your afternoon, and I will see you all on Thursday.
Thank you, David.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. See you later.